Hello, everybody, and welcome into episode 1125. If you're listening to this on the audio version of the podcast, or 344, if you're listening to this on the video podcast, we have a very special simulcast for today's episode because I am joined by two very amazing people. First of all, the one and only Perri Goldstein, who usually joins me every other Sunday, but this isn't her normal Sunday, which doesn't matter. You don't care. She's here anyway. I'm super excited about it. Perri, how are you doing?
I'm great. I obviously can't get enough of you both because I just left Green Bay and here I am podcasting with you the very next week.
Well, we couldn't get enough of you either. We're happy to have you back on. And we also brought with us the famously talented and one and only Rachel Hopmeyer from NBC 26, sports reporter, Packer extraordinaire, awesome person. Rachel, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing great after that type of intro. Can I wake up to that every day? That's the type of hype I need.
Yeah, you can. 365 days a year, you can wake up to our podcast. It's great. And you can listen. No, I'm just kidding. But thank you both so much. I'm super looking forward to this episode. The podcast has been called by many, and by that, I mean me, the greatest Packers podcast of all time. And I think this is going to be our best one yet. But we actually have a decent amount to talk about. We, of course, just had a Jets preseason game. We had some press conferences on Sunday that had some noteworthy items. We've got another roster cut down coming on Tuesday. So plenty to discuss today. But Rachel, I want to kick things off with you. You were in the press box for the game. I just want to get your 1,000-foot takeaway from if you could take away anything from that just glorious, wonderful game that we got to experience.
I really loved the energy that comes with the combination of both Bankert fighting for his roster spot and giving Getsy the play calling duties. I just think, the energy of going for it on fourth down 2 or 3 times in a preseason game is pretty fun. Obviously, we can't ignore those challenge flags, but this is really, now that we're down to 3 preseason games instead of 4, that type of crunch time is even more condensed. And we see so many position battles really starting to shape itself out. And like Mo Drayton said today, this will be a lot of timing and decision making for how we're going to figure out the starters, not exactly roster cuts even, but like solidifying those starting 5 or who's really taking those punt returns. There's just so many decisions to be made in such a shorter amount of time that it's fascinating to see it go faster.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Was there a specific player of those matchups, whether it be along the offensive line, kick returner, punt returner, that you felt really helped their cause on Saturday?
I love seeing Stokes against Corey Davis, and we've seen him obviously take those one-team reps plenty of times against Jair, against so many, but again, seeing it in the game, I think really continues that trajectory for me. He hasn't really fallen off. He's taken these strides, and even when he does take a step or two back, he puts his head down and keeps grinding, and I think that so far has been a really positive, externally seeming linear progression that I think it should be a really good sign for everybody. You also can't deny TJ Slayton. I mean, the kid's getting to work. We all know consistency is going to be key in terms of his playing time this season, but it is awesome to see the big man eat.
Yeah, I think that rookie class is going to definitely be a takeaway from this. But Perri, I know you're going to probably want to talk about Eric Stokes because you are cornerback extraordinaire 1A. But what were your takeaways from that game?
Yeah, I mean, I won't reiterate Rachel, but I completely agree. I think that there's nothing like real game time reps for someone like that. And very rarely in preseason do you get to actually go up against a one receiver, right? And so obviously Zach Wilson is trying to get on the same page with his guys. So they had their starters out there. And luckily for Stokes, he got to go up against Corey Davis. I think separately for me, obviously the depth behind Amos and Savage is a big question mark, but to be quite honest, with Vernon Scott out and not playing, Enos Gaines and Henry Black really showed that I think they both deserve a roster spot. I don't know how many safeties they're going to keep, but they led the game and they led the defense in tackles. They come in the game and they immediately make an impact, especially Gaines. And so I don't know if the Packers are just very good at scouting undrafted talent or are just very good at developing their secondary players, but I'm really, really excited about those two guys. I think the other takeaway for me, and it's hard because preseason this year has been shaped around Jordan Love. What does Jordan Love look like? So when he doesn't play, it can become somewhat disappointing. I found it a pretty entertaining game regardless. And the one thing I noticed for sure, and I think we knew this, especially if you're sort of plugged in, you both are at practice all the time, but all of the running backs had pass catches and were thrown at. And to me, like, that's obviously going to be a really, really, really key feature for Matt LaFleur, but it's not just about AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones. It's about everybody behind them, Patrick Taylor, Dexter Williams, whether they make those catches or not. you're going to have to see the running backs do that in this offense. And all of them showed up. All of them had catches. Obviously, Kylan Hill looks like the immediate number 3, which is really exciting for a 7th round pick. But yeah, they're going to be involved in the passing game.
Can we talk about Kylan Hill for a second? Because as you guys know, I've been geeking out over Kylan since A, I watched his tape, since B, he showed up mini camps, OTAs, training camp, and looks legit. Now, again, we never crown anyone until they do it on Sundays. So we'll reserve as much judgment as we possibly can until we see him do it against the best of the best. But every once in a while, a player comes along and you can just kind of sense something, right? You can sense a natural talent. You can sense he has it, right? And it didn't take long for Packer fans to realize that Aaron Jones was that type of player when they picked him in the 5th round. In fact, I would actually argue that the fans seemingly knew before Mike McCarthy knew, who did not want to use him at all in games. And I think it's still going to be very tough for Kylan to get action, of course, behind Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, but we know that that's a position that gets nicked up quite a bit, and you never know when you're going to be thrown into the fray. And the thing that's surprised me most, and Rachel, you've obviously been at practice as well, but he's gotten so much time with the ones because, of course, Aaron's had that injury. AJ's had an injury. Nothing serious, but they both missed time with team activities. Kylan Hill doesn't miss a beat, whether it's been in pass protection, whether it's been receiving out of the backfield, like you just mentioned, Perri, whether it's just been running the football inside, outside. He's done all of it well, which I think he showed on tape, but it's still such an amazing thing to see for a 7th round pick.
Especially when you consider that he did take off all of last year just to prepare for the draft. He is really, if Aaron Rodgers wants to talk about efficiency and maximizing that, here we are. He is making the best of every single rep he can. And I really think it is a good thing for not only him to be placed in a system that's going to be emphasizing that type of versatility, ground game and pass catching, but he's doing it behind AJ Dillon, who's been hungry for those same types of opportunities. He's watching guys just like him, even at a higher level, pursue those same schemes and that same type of game. So when you have that going for you, even if it's not on the Packers, I mean, this type of implementation into the league is going to be huge for building the foundations to Kylan Hill's NFL career.
He seems like such a more complete rookie running back than I think I've seen in a while. And it's not even just that he's doing all the things you mentioned, but like his vision and the way they used him. They got, AJ Dillon basically trucking down the field, and they put Kylan Hill in the red zone, and he can get in there. He can shift around guys, but then he knows when to put his shoulders down and just truck through someone. It's pretty impressive. And I think very, very soon, everyone's going to be asking, like, how did this guy fall so far in the draft?
I think those questions are already starting to get asked. And I think the other thing that I wanted to point out about running back as well in this entire group, we know that, Aaron Jones is now going into his 2nd contract, but for a superstar, maybe superstar's a bit strong, but a star running back like Aaron Jones, he doesn't have the usual wear and tear that a guy going into his 2nd contract did, partially because, as I mentioned, Mike McCarthy didn't use him a ton in his first couple seasons, but also Green Bay's been very smart with him the last couple of years. Jamal Williams getting a lot of those carries as well. But secondly, you look at the rest of those guys on the roster. AJ Dillon had 100 touches ish last year, like total. Actually, I think it was like 100 snaps. It wasn't even touches, like 100 snaps right around their total. Like, he's completely fresh. You've got Kylan Hill, who, again, basically outside of, I think, 3 quick games at the beginning of the year, didn't play hardly any snaps last year. Dexter hardly played any snaps last year. Patrick Taylor didn't play any snaps last year. So regardless of how this shakes out, and my guess is either Dexter or Patrick will get back in the practice squad, maybe even both, regardless of who they end up running with, we know Aaron's going to get his, but this is a completely fresh group of running backs. This is not a trio of backs who is just running to the ground and you're trying to get any last carries out of them. I really like that for a running back group that has that sort of youth and depth and versatility. It's amazing.
Absolutely. And then the fact that they are all still fresh, the Packers want to keep it that way. We thought last year was going to be a balancing act between these 3 talented backs. This year, they should probably go into that with that same mindset to keep those legs fresh, to make sure if AJ's really taking on as much as Jamal did last year, how do we keep Jones and Kylan rotating? What can they all handle in terms of ground game, pass game, like we've already said. So it is going to be as equally precarious of a balancing act, I think.
And I think that's a good thing. Perri, we're going to say something? Oh, well, that's cool then. But I think, especially to your point, Rachel, 17 game season, that extra game, just again, having that depth and being able to spread out those carries. I know everyone like last year, like the second quarter, every game would come and everyone would be like, what happened to Aaron Jones? Well, like that was like the quarter that they gave the carries to Jamal Williams, kept him fresh for the second half, didn't pile on, a ton of touches to him. But again, I think that's why Aaron Jones is in such good shape and not just run into the ground. Like we've seen players like Zeke Elliott, amongst many of Todd Gurley, et cetera, where they just got run into the ground. And, by the time their second contract came, they didn't have anything left. Before we jump over to the quarterback, because I think Kurt Benkert's worth talking about here in his performance, I do want to quickly talk about the offensive line, because my concern in this game, that first game, the offensive line looked bad. And now all of a sudden you're going with a number 3 quarterback in Kurt Benkert. You're sitting 32 guys. If that offensive line would have performed poorly again, like that could have been a very ugly game, like 42-0 Jets, because the offense just would not have been able to do anything. They performed much better. And of any group that I think, if you could have asked me ahead of the game, for the players that were playing in this game, which group do you actually want to play well? Unequivocally, I would have said offensive line, because whether it's Ben Braden, whether it's, Yash Nijman, fighting for a spot, all those guys, the rookies, Royce Newman, Josh Myers, you guys know the names, but John Running Jr., you wanted to see those guys take a step. I thought that we saw that. Perri, what did you see from the offensive line on Saturday?
Yeah, not my greatest strong suit is scouting out offensive line, but my biggest takeaway was that when you took Josh Myers out and you put Lucas Patrick in, I thought the play declined. And that says a lot. Again, like rookie eye, so not my thing, but I do really think that like Josh Myers is very impressive, and that potentially, and we'll probably get to this, like I don't know where Lucas Patrick fits into this offensive line if he's not going to fill in at center, which is what everybody kind of felt like he would do. And I think more than anything, just impressive that a rookie, honestly, this entire rookie class, like this was the rookie class game, same with Royce Newman. The Packers are very potentially going to get really, really quality snaps out of like 6 of their rookies this season. And that's pretty incredible for a team that tends to do the whole draft and develop, we expect nothing out of them for a couple of seasons philosophy.
I think that's a good point. Rachel, did you see anything from the O-line?
I was, and this is good. And this is why Perri and I work together, because that is where I do tend to pay attention. So we complement each other. I'm still liking what we're getting out of Ben Braden. I think he's been nothing but a positive addition. And I think he has been really receptive when I see him in practice to implement things in the game. Obviously, whether it's Royce Newman's misstep or Kurt Benkert's misstep, that's still a miscommunication. And as everybody says, everybody has to be on the same page. So that still needs to be worked out. But again, that's an understandable kink in the game to me. That is what preseason is for, to work those types of snaps out. Obviously, Josh Myers is impressive. The man plays up to his size so well. It is impressive as an understatement to see his entry into the league like this and be so prepared for this moment. I'm honestly excited to look back on this in a few years and hope that it was a good personal adjustment for him. I think Yosh really does a good balancing act on the other side too, but I do also see steps that need to be taken in his game as well. But again, as we all know, it's Lucas Patrick that really needs to step up the most, because this class that could be our starting 5-6, he's just not there. And it's interesting to see from a guy who's been in this system.
Yeah, it's been honestly one of the more surprising and actually disappointing aspects of this offseason so far, because I thought Patrick, listen, he's never going to be your Pro Bowl caliber right guard, right? But he's always been steady, and there's a lot of value of that, especially when you can play left guard, center, and right guard. And I actually thought when he played left guard last year is when he really struggled, and when he was at right guard, he played much better. But overall, when you have that player who played that well for you all last season to now come in and just seemingly, I don't know whether it's not like losing a step. He's not at that age, right? But just something feels off. I think that's been one of the more disappointing aspects. But on the flip side, is it weird that this very much could end up Josh Myers at center, Royce Newman at right guard, 2 starting rookies week 1? And I'm not nervous at all about that. Like, I'm sure there's going to be some potential miscommunications we saw. And it was funny because after the game, Matt LaFleur was much more of like, hey, Kurt's got to get out of center quicker. And then today when he talked, or Sunday when he talked, it was more of like, Royce literally stepped over the center's like position, like, so it definitely sounds like it was more on Royce, but overall, I was really impressed by Royce Newman in this game as well. There were a couple things second quarter later in the game that he could have cleaned up a little bit, but you watch early in that game where AJ Dillon was running, there were a couple really nice runs right behind Royce Newman. I'm excited about those two rookies, and I'm not afraid at all of going into the season with potentially two rookies at those two spots, which seems crazy.
Well, that's exactly what Brian Gutekunst wants to hear. So good. They made these moves and they clearly felt confident enough in them. I really do think that with the draft moves they made this year and the amount of O-line depth they've been working toward for the last few years, even when you see Lindsley go, this isn't a surprise. It's maybe surprising based on what we've seen happen in practice now be implemented in the game, but these are moves that should be resulting in these types of game decisions.
That's a good point. I think that makes a ton of sense. We do need to talk about Kurt Benkert, though, because this was the Kurt Benkert game. This has been a really great story all throughout, really, since he signed with the team. He has adopted the Green Bay Packers in a way that I'm not sure almost anyone else has adopted the Green Bay Packers so quickly. Like the fans, Paul Brettel and him are having barbecue together, which is just beyond amazing. Like the whole thing has just been so crazy to watch. But all of a sudden, he goes from like a complete, mostly afterthought when he signed, to starting and almost playing the entirety of this third or second preseason game. Rachel, I'll start with you. What were your Kurt Benkert takeaways?
When I see these types of like hero character stories like this, I really cared in the post game, emotionally, what was this night like for him? Because quite literally, barely anybody else in the world will ever relate to that experience. And like I said, the energy behind his enthusiasm, Getsy's play calling, tripping twice on a 19-play drive. Again, I don't know if anybody in the world can ever relate to that type of moment, but the moxie that he had to go for it and truly say, this is my best stage I'm ever going to have. And it's all or nothing. I was really impressed with the energy he had behind throwing the ball, because I do think what he possesses is what LaFleur criticized from Love last week when he said he needs to just sling it sometimes. I don't think Kurt's afraid to just sling it. And that for me is reassuring to see in a quarterback. That's what you want in your third stringer, because he's ready to go every single time. Now, I will say LaFleur still said as of now, he doesn't see him overtaking Love for that number 2 job.
Right.
We have to see how this injury plays out, obviously, because that will determine the path going forward. But if this shoulder thing does linger, how can you rule that out? And LaFleur did say, I'm not closing the door, but as of now, he says that Love has shown more in practice than Benkert's resume.
Perri, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think Benkert has less to lose, if that makes sense. Like Love is thinking more because he has to. And I know that, yes, he should sling it more. He should rely on his instincts a little bit more, but he also has like the entire league's eyes on him. And I think that may play a factor. Whereas Kurt is QB3, this tape could maybe be used if another team, don't want to put this out into the universe for Packers fans, but wants to pick him up. This is like his best shot to maybe be QB2 elsewhere where the depth isn't as good, but he definitely has like a lot less to lose. Therefore, he can kind of just go all in. He looked great for a QB3, right? And he is such an amazing story. And he's really like ingrained in the community, which is lovely because he said it even in his presser, right? He's like, I'm probably never going to see the field. So this was my game. This was my shot. I went out there. I enjoyed it. And he did it for all the other guys, especially on the offense, who do have something to prove to potentially actually make this 53-man roster. And so he gave it what he got for them as well. At least that's my assumption.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I want to start by saying this has been, I think, one of the coolest stories of this entire offseason so far has been Kurt Benkert. And again, how he's really embraced the Green Bay Packer culture, Green Bay as a city. Like, it's been so fun to watch. I'm going to be a little bit of the jerk here, though, and say, like, it was interesting to me because, and Perry's not surprised by this at all. Neither is Rachel, I'm sure, but it was interesting to me, like, all these questions after of like, oh, is he pushing Jordan Love for the number 2? Or is he now going to make the 53? If anything, I viewed this game as the opposite. I viewed this game as a really nice performance, as Perri literally just said, for a number 3 quarterback. Like, that's what you're kind of hoping for. And I'll say this. There is a little bit of Jeff Garcia, and maybe I'm aging myself with that reference a little bit there, but there's a little bit of Jeff Garcia in his game where Jeff Garcia wasn't the greatest athlete in the world. He wasn't the greatest arm in the world. He just had sort of a way of going about things and finding receivers and slinging it down the field without fear, running around when you need to. There's a little bit of Jeff Garcia in his game, but when you're looking at a quarterback like this, or a guy like a player in the back of your roster that's going to make that 53 is maybe like a redshirt guy, a guy that you're not expecting to play, everything that you're looking for in that situation is upside. And ultimately, at the end of the day, Kurt Benkert's in his 4th season, 26 years old, not a laser rocket arm. There just lacks that overall upside. And unfortunately, and again, I know I'm being a little bit of the jerk here though, but unfortunately you release Kurt Benkert and you can find another Kurt Benkert is, I guess, kind of what I'm saying here. Maybe not the guy, maybe not the embracing the culture, but from a pure player standpoint, it's really tough to me to justify a 53-man roster spot on a player like that when you need potentially 6 wide receivers, 4 tight ends, maybe 5 or 6 safeties. Like there's so much depth on this team elsewhere. It's really difficult to make that. Now, I think he's a very strong shoe-in for the practice squad, assuming he doesn't clear waivers. And I think that's a great spot for him. And Rachel, as you mentioned, if all of a sudden Jordan Love's shoulder is just not up to par, then yeah, you probably have to keep him for those first couple weeks and then kind of make a decision after that. But Tom Moore has one of my greatest quotes of all time that I can't say in its entirety, but they were asking why they didn't give more of the reps to Peyton Manning's backups when he was in Indianapolis. And he said, if 18 goes down, we're effed, and we don't practice effed. And at the end of the day, if Aaron Rodgers goes down, if 12 goes down, for the most part, you're effed. You still have Jordan Love, and maybe there's some puncher's chance there and some other stuff. But if you get to Kurt Benkert, you are effed. And he actually might be even worse in the effect that if you're effed, you almost want to lose and just get great draft capital. And he actually might go out and win you a couple games because he just has that sort of moxie. And that might be the worst thing that you want actually in that situation. So I love the story. I love the person. I think it's all cool. I hope he makes the practice squad. I hope he goes out and kills it. I just don't see it as like this competition for Jordan Love or even this potential 53-man roster spot.
I didn't think people in Green Bay even entertained tanking. This is the news to me.
They don't, but
they don't,
not at all. But it's at least a noteworthy item nonetheless, for me at least. But am I wrong in my takes? Am I just a jerk?
I don't think you're wrong, because you're absolutely right. There is just so much depth on this team that is the defining characteristic of how we're going to cut this down from 80 Tuesday to 53 in less than 10 days. So the issue is, if that depth wasn't there, if Jordan Love didn't have a shoulder injury, I think this guy would be a shoo-in for the 53. It's perfectly fine to keep 3 quarterbacks when you have that. But now the Packers are even looking at keeping 7 receivers. There's just so many questions to be had here that, like we know, Aaron Rodgers wants weapons. Kurt Benkert is not a weapon. Aaron Rodgers wants people he can throw to. And that's where they need to prioritize the depth for this last dance hoorah.
1,000,000% agree. Perri, I know you will gladly tell me I'm a jerk if I'm a jerk. So
no, you're not being a jerk. You're being a realistic jerk. It's fine. No, it's true. I think Rachel hit the nail on the head, right? Like, Kurt Benkert at the end of the day is not going to help this team win football games if all goes as planned, like you just laid out. And it's never a problem to have too many good options to choose from. But right now, that's what the Packers are facing with a lot of really important positions. And so you kind of hope that he clears waivers and comes back on the practice squad, and you get to, keep the cult hero, the fan base legend around. But if you're looking at this from a purely like football standpoint, you don't want Kurt Benkert on the 53.
I think that's fair. Totally fair. Well, I appreciate me only being a realistic jerk. I will take that every day of the week. We did have some, interesting press conferences. Joe Barry, Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst, amongst others, spoke on Sunday. I think the most noteworthy item of that was Matt LaFleur talking about Zadarius Smith, saying that this could be something that lingers in and that he may not be available week 1. It didn't seem like he said it with necessarily a whole level of conviction. I think anytime you have a back injury, right, like those things can linger for, you don't know how long, right? So I'm sure there is some concern that could linger into week 1. But while I think this Green Bay team can certainly survive a Saints team without a Zadarius Smith, a serious or even lingering Zadarius Smith injury certainly would be cause for concern regardless. Perri, what were your thoughts on hearing that today?
I feel like the Packers training staff in general are really, really cautious, which I appreciate, especially with guys like Zadarius, Jordan Love. I mean, you want them to be cautious with everyone, but especially the ones that are very, very important to winning football games. And like you said, if he's not there week 1, okay. I kind of think about this like when Kenny Clark went down early last year. Like, you want to be as cautious as possible because this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yep.
But back issues are kind of a different animal. And for a guy like Za'Darius, who's aging a little bit, like leaning on that other end of where you don't want to be for an edge rusher, it's somewhat concerning, but it's just because you want him healthy, because when he's on the field, he's incredibly impactful. And I know that this is probably not helping his chances for the extension he wants so badly either. You know, he wants to be out there because playing is the way you get paid. So I have a feeling that there's like some weight to this, and they're holding him out because they really don't want this to turn into something worse than it is and keep him out for longer than he needs to be. But again, I usually chalk it up to just the Packers training staff being like very, very cautious with their players.
I think you can underline this situation too with the fact that Randy Ramsey's also on IR. Like there's some real weak spots. This went from deep to not real quick. Obviously Rashawn can move around and stuff like that, but at least Tipa Galea actually showed some flashes of potential this weekend. That's like maybe the only bright spot fans have to look at right now. But otherwise, this is just another shuffling amongst the linebackers.
Yeah, I think that the concern here, right, is like you probably feel pretty okay with Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith as potential edge rushers here, but the depth there, Jonathan Garvin, Tipa Nalii, Chauncey Rivers, like those guys just haven't been totally up to par as like guys that you'd want on the field. And I think that is definitely a slightly more concerning than even the injury disease, because those guys are going to have to play snaps. And right now, I don't think they're up to that. So that's absolutely a concerning aspect of this as well. Let's switch gears entirely. Donald Driver softball game. We had it on Sunday. Rachel, you were there covering it. Give us the down low on the Donald Driver softball game, because we need to hear the highlights here.
It was a fun time. Unfortunately, Donald Driver's team lost terribly to James Jones' team, but it was a good time had by all. The weather was beautiful. It was really cool to see the stands packed with green and gold. I definitely lost count of the amount of Driver jerseys I saw. Donald Driver held a press conference before the game, and I took it as an opportunity to ask him anything and everything. Packers business decisions, thoughts on the crowded wide receiver room currently, Devontae catching up to him. And he took it all. I mean, what better guy who's still so invested in his hometown franchise, because this is his adopted hometown, to be talking about the current situation with the Packers. And at the end of the day, he's always going to be that invested in this team, because like you said, in 1999, this entire fan base embraced him when he didn't even know anybody here. So it's cool to see a guy that's so passionate about their market.
Yeah, it is. Like those things are always so ridiculously fun. And you love that, there's so much of this goes to charity. You love seeing James Jones, Donald Driver, all these guys come back together. Who is the MVP of the game? Do you know, was there an MVP?
No, I don't think they named it MVP. I mean, we were literally at like 33-25 in terms of a baseball score. You should see the box score. It was ridiculous. The guy had to forward it along by saying, please do not try and actually interpret this, but this is technically the score. So I'm pretty sure we had one inning where one home run counted as 10 just to catch up. It was a mess. But listen, it's just so cool. And fans are cheering. James Jones took the mic for half the game just to, make fun of everybody on the field. Like what's not to love? It's a bunch of guys having a good time.
Yeah, for sure. And if you've never had a chance to get out to one of those, definitely do so. They're a ton of fun and obviously go towards a good cause. And just seeing some of those guys play any sort of sport again when back in the area is always fun. So always great to hear that. Glad you were able to cover that. Let's close up shop today. That's obviously our feel good story. Now we have our maybe not so great story. We definitely have some roster cuts coming up. We got to go from 85 to 80 on Tuesday, then 80 to 53. Before we get to that 80 to 53, we have that 5-man cut on Tuesday. Of course, none of us are wishing anyone to get released. We would love all 85 of the players on the roster to go on to have Hall of Fame careers. Unfortunately, that's usually not how it works out. Perri, who are you thinking might be at least in the running to be in that group on Tuesday?
Do I have to actually name people?
You don't have to name people. If you don't want to name people, where are positions that maybe you're keeping an eye on where this could kind of come from? I'll be the jerk on this one again. I'll name people.
Okay, cool.
Name them left and right.
Nice. Really just because there are, of course, you could go through the depth chart here and kind of pick out the guys whose names you haven't heard at all and just kind of assume they're going to be cut. To me, I think my biggest question coming out of practice and the preseason game, both games, are just the inside linebacker group, because right now, presumably you have 5 inside linebackers that have some role right now on this team, and not even including, some of the other depth inside linebackers that they have stashed away. and they all kind of play a different role, or at least have some upside, et cetera. And I'd be hard pressed to think that the Packers keep 5 on the roster. That seems high for them, but Devondre Campbell hasn't played at all. Chris Barnes is going to start. You think those are going to be the main 2. Kamal Martin made some plays in the second preseason game. You're really glad to see him healthy. I think he has tons of upside. Obviously, they drafted him. They love him. And then you have Oren Burks and Ty Summers, who, while they may not give you the most when it comes to defense, they're like your leading guys on special teams. And for a special teams unit that looks, horrible. You want to keep those 2 guys around as well, but you don't want to keep anyone who's just there for special teams. So there's just like a lot of questions for me about the inside linebacker group. And I'd be really, really curious to see what the Packers do in terms of like roster spots there.
Rachel, what about you?
See, and I completely agree with you that there's just so much that still needs to be figured out there, because like we've seen, a 73-yard return, I think, is unacceptable for special teams around here. So to me, I think the first unit that has to go is wide receivers. And I hate to say it, because Juwan Winfrey was on such a hot start, but I think he's going to be soon to be cut because of just the potential and upside we've seen throughout elsewhere. I don't know how Funchess hasn't played himself in at this point. And I think he deserves it with his resume, with his standout performances at games and at practice. I think he's earned it. And I'm bummed because I really thought Juwan Winfrey was making a name for himself, and hopefully it's made a name around the league. But I think this might be the week you start chipping away at that receiver room.
But what about Malik Taylor? Because then you watched Malik Taylor yesterday and he looked great. And that was my other thought too, is you think you want to keep Funchess. Obviously he's a vet. He's played in a Super Bowl. Like, he brings so much more than any of those other fringe guys, but it's so hard to look at a guy like Malik Taylor, who was on the roster last year as well, and who looked pretty good yesterday.
And that could really come down to interpersonal decisions. We know it's not just one person making these decisions. Maybe someone really likes their chemistry.
Ask Aaron Rodgers maybe this time which one he would like to keep. Maybe that could help out a little bit, unlike maybe a season ago. But anyway, just kind of going through really quickly here. I do wonder if maybe the JJ Molson time is up, and maybe you just give, kind of JJ or Mason Crosby, that last week just to kick. If you want to save his leg, if you don't want him to kick off, just onside kick. I don't know, whatever. Have him squib kick. Like, there's a lot of different ways you can save his leg if because let's be real, Mason's probably not getting cut. I also think that wide receiver room, I could see a Chris Blair, Juwan Winfrey going on an IR, released with an injury designation, Jacob Capra, Coy Cronk, maybe one of those guys, and maybe like a Ray Wilborn, someone like that, who are just having, real uphill struggles to kind of make this roster. A lot of this is going to be, are there any of these guys they want to try to sneak onto the practice squad? And if so, they probably want to keep them around a week longer. I think the interesting thing with this is, as we get down to 80 players now, remember, it's a 53-man roster, but a 16-man practice squad, right? So like, once you're down to 80, if you can get 16 of your own guys back, you're only losing 11 guys. A couple more of those guys might go on IR. Like, you could, realistically end up with all but like 8 or 9 guys back on your roster, which is crazy to think about. So that last cut down is certainly still most important, but this one may actually have more impact when it comes to, who doesn't make the practice squad and things like that. Really quickly, we got to get going here. I know you guys are insanely busy people, but I'm going to say 3 names: Devin Funchess, Lucas Patrick, and who's my other one? Tyler Lancaster. Really quickly, Rachel, which of them ends up making the final roster?
Funchess.
Okay, Funchess is the one. All right, Perri, what about you?
I'll go with Tyler Lancaster because defensive line depth is also still questionable.
I'm going to say that none of the 3 make the roster. I'm going to say all 3.
That was an option?
Yeah, you can say, I'm sorry. I'm an awful explainer.
I thought this was rock, paper, scissors.
Sorry. I guess I would have had to go with the other then, but I think Patrick's contract is complicated. I think Funchess's contract, I think you can get Malik Taylor for less and potentially get some of those other guys back on the practice squad. And I think Jack Heflin is Tyler Lancaster, younger, more agile, strong. Like, I just think you've got basically a better Tyler Lancaster who's younger and cheaper. So I think all 3 may end up being gone. You guys are absolutely amazing for doing this, both audio and video. Thank you so incredibly much. Rachel, where can we find you on Twitter, and where can we find your work?
At Rachel Hopmeyer on everything. And if you're in the Green Bay area or not, you can watch at NBC26.com.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Perri, where can we find you?
Just follow me on Twitter at Perri_Goldstein. You can find all the things there.
And of course, our rival hated podcast, the Packs What She Said podcast, which is also absolutely amazing. So make sure to check that out as well. For Rachel Hopmeyer, that's Perri Goldstein. If you're not following the Pack a Day podcast already, make sure to do so. If you want to give us 5 stars and like us or review us or subscribe on YouTube, we would be forever indebted to you as well. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.